Our whole world was turned upside down from that point. You took it upon yourself to end my son's life. You changed our lives.
It was so very hard for me to tell a 5-year-old his dad would never come home.
I don't regret that. The only thing that I regret is that he was killed too. I wish I killed more of those mother.
Jose Dwayne Ricardo Onfroy, better known as XXXTentacion, was a name that electrified the world of hip-hop and alternative rap. Known for his raw emotion and genre-blending music, XXXTentacion was beloved by millions. Yet, on the sunny afternoon of June 18, 2018, the rap community was shaken to its core when news broke that the 20-year-old star had been gunned down in a brutal robbery in Deerfield Beach, Florida. That day had started like any other, but with plans that would turn tragically fateful. Jose was accompanied by his step-uncle Leonard Kerr on a trip to Riva Motorsports to shop for a motorcycle, a purchase that would symbolize yet another step forward in the young artist's already skyrocketing career. Earlier, Onfroy had withdrawn around $50,000 in cash from the bank, a sum meant to seal the deal on his new ride. Little did he know, 4 men were watching his every move with dark intent. The 4 individuals, Michael Boatwright, Traven Newsom, Dedrick Williams, and Robert Allen, had been tailing Jose throughout the day. Their target was not chosen at random. The group knew precisely who XXXTentacion was and had set their sights on robbing him. Williams and Allen even entered the Riva Motorsports dealership, their eyes discreetly tracing the young star's movements to confirm it was indeed him. The entire situation played out with a nerve-wracking sense of foreboding. As Onfroy and Kerr left the dealership, their path was intercepted by a dark SUV that roared up with an air of menace. The quiet of the Florida afternoon was shattered as Boatwright and Newsom, armed and masked, leapt from the vehicle and approached Jose's car. Kerr later recounted the moment with chilling clarity. The taller man moved to Jose's side while the other rounded to his door. A brief but desperate scuffle ensued. Jose, caught in a whirlwind of panic and adrenaline, resisted. But the struggle was brief. In what seemed like a heartbeat, shots were fired. The gunfire tore through the air, each crack echoing with a finality that would silence a young life brimming with potential. The robbers snatched the Louis Vuitton bag, stuffed with cash, and bolted back to their SUV, leaving the rapper slumped, lifeless, in the driver's seat of his sleek black BMW. Passers-by, drawn by the commotion, recorded the aftermath on their phones. One video, seared into the collective consciousness of the internet, showed Jose unresponsive, his eyes vacant as blood pooled around him. Emergency services were called, but it was already too late. News of XXXTentacion's death spread like wildfire, reverberating throughout the music industry and beyond. Shocked fans, fellow artists, and friends expressed their grief. Tributes from high-profile figures like Diplo and J. Cole flooded social media, painting a picture of a complex artist whose influence was felt far and wide. Law enforcement wasted little time in tracking down the suspects. Dedrick Williams was the first to be arrested, his image caught clearly by CCTV footage. Robert Allen was apprehended soon after and later agreed to testify against the others in exchange for a reduced sentence. The trial that followed was as high-profile as the crime itself, capturing public attention with its dramatic twists and turns. The prosecution's case was airtight, built on a trove of evidence that painted a vivid picture of a meticulously planned robbery. Leonard Kerr's testimony was damning. He described in haunting detail how he had watched his stepnephew struggle for his life before being cut down by gunfire. But it was the photographic and video evidence that added the final nails to the defendants' coffins. Pictures and videos surfaced showing the suspects flaunting their stolen loot. One image featured Dedrick Williams fanning out $100 bills, his grin a macabre celebration. Another video showed the group celebrating, oblivious to the fact that their moments of gloating would soon come back to haunt them. Perhaps the most critical point of the trial came when Robert Allen, having secured a deal, took the stand. Allen revealed the roles each man had played. Newsom grabbed the cash, Boatwright pulled the trigger, and Williams acted as the driver. His testimony sent shockwaves through the courtroom, confirming what the prosecution had meticulously outlined. Allen's cooperation, paired with other evidence, left the defense with few options. Attempts to redirect blame, including wild accusations implicating high-profile rappers like Drake, fell flat under scrutiny. Williams's attorney floated a theory that Drake, whom XXXTentacion had once named in a social media post, was somehow behind the killing. But these allegations were dismissed as theatrics, leaving the jury focused on the evidence at hand. The summer evening of June 20, 2018, cast a haunting shadow over the Bronx, a place known for its vibrant culture and tight-knit community. That night, a gruesome act would forever etch itself into the heart of the city. On this fateful evening, Jonaiki Martinez Estrella, along with his fellow gang members, Manuel Rivera, Elvin Garcia, Jose Muniz, and Antonio Santiago, unleashed an act of violence so savage it sent ripples of horror across New York and beyond. The victim was 15-year-old Leandro Guzman Feliz, a teenager whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the worst possible time. The perpetrators were members of the infamous Dominican gang, the Trinitarios, whose reputation for brutality was matched only by their fierce loyalty to the streets. It all began innocently enough for Leandro, or Junior, as he was known among friends and family. The young teen had stepped out of his apartment, weaving through the familiar Bronx streets to meet a new friend just a few blocks away. Little did he know, death itself prowled these streets that night, masked by the roar of 4 approaching cars filled with hardened gang members on a mission. Music from nearby shops thumped into the humid night air, but even that couldn't muffle the tension that crackled as the vehicles closed in on their unsuspecting prey. The chase was swift and merciless. Leandro, suddenly aware of the imminent danger, ran with every ounce of energy his young legs could muster. The darkness of the streets offered little sanctuary, and before long, he found himself cornered in a local bodega. The narrow shop, normally a hub for everyday neighborhood life, transformed into a frantic scene of desperation as Junior sprinted inside, breathless and terrified. The CCTV footage later released would replay his final moments endlessly. The glances over his shoulder, the sheer panic etched on his face, and his futile attempts to disappear behind the cluttered counter. But fate offered no reprieve. The Trinitarios stormed in, eyes wild with rage and adrenaline. One of the gang members spotted Junior's frantic attempts to blend into the small space, triggering a violent scuffle that ended with him being dragged outside by force. The bodega's flimsy walls couldn't mute the sounds of chaos, the shouts, the crashing of shelves, the guttural pleas for mercy. What happened next unfolded like a nightmare that no one could wake from. Armed with knives that gleamed in the dim streetlights and machetes whose blades whispered of bloodshed, the 5 gang members took turns hacking and stabbing the teen in a grotesque display of loyalty to their cause. The air grew thick with the metallic scent of blood as Junior's cries echoed into the emptying street. By the time the gang finally retreated to their waiting getaway cars, leaving their victim collapsed on the sidewalk, silence followed. A silence broken only by the distant sound of engines revving away into the dark. In a chilling case from Wisconsin, Michael Thomas, only 16 years old at the time, became the focal point of a tragic and violent incident that left an indelible mark on the community. It was 2011 when Thomas, along with Malik Merchant and Jimmy Scales, set out on a reckless mission that would turn deadly. The trio was driving around in a stolen minivan when they pulled up on West Lisbon Avenue, their mind set on robbery. A fatal encounter. Their victim that day was Sharon Staples, a 34-year-old woman who, unbeknownst to them, was carrying a new life inside her, 12 weeks pregnant. Thomas exited the vehicle and approached Sharon, demanding her purse. The encounter quickly escalated when Sharon resisted. The situation turned fatal as Thomas, in a split second of rash decision-making, fired his weapon, killing Sharon and her unborn child. The arrest and charges. Thomas was soon arrested, the weight of his actions crushing down on him. The evidence was damning, and rather than drag the case through a prolonged trial, he pled guilty to 2 counts of first-degree reckless homicide, acknowledging the double tragedy of Sharon's death and the loss of her unborn baby. Courtroom chaos. The courtroom was tense during Thomas's sentencing, with family members and the public present, awaiting the outcome that would decide the teenager's fate. For most of the proceedings, Thomas sat calm and quiet, appearing to accept the gravity of what he had done. But as the hearing concluded and deputies prepared to escort him out, the atmosphere shifted sharply. Suddenly, Thomas made a bold and unexpected attempt to move toward his family seated in the courtroom. The scene erupted into chaos as deputies sprang into action, wrestling him to the ground. The gallery exploded in an outburst of shouting, panic, and confusion. The deputies' efforts to subdue Thomas were met with resistance as he struggled with surprising strength, further inflaming the emotional tension in the room. "Have a seat!" Despite the mayhem, deputies managed to stand Thomas up, though his defiance continued. Cries, pleas, and raw emotion filled the courtroom as officers attempted to calm the crowd. A sheriff intervened, attempting to restore order and address the distressed family members. "Listen, listen," the sheriff's voice boomed over the noise. "No good is going to come from disrupting this court. Please, let's remain calm." The tension was palpable as family members and supporters began to leave the courtroom, but not without further drama. One man, identified as Chuck, lashed out verbally when a deputy asked him to wait. "Leave me the expletive alone," Chuck shouted, the raw pain evident in his voice. His outburst earned him a swift response. He was handcuffed and escorted out, adding yet another layer of heartbreak to an already devastating day. Sentencing ultimately, Michael Thomas was sentenced to 35 years in prison. The sentence reflected not only the fatal act that ended 2 lives, but also the young age and circumstances of the perpetrator, striking a balance between justice and acknowledgement of his youth. Sentences for accomplices. The court didn't spare the others involved. Malik Merchant, who had acted as a lookout during the robbery, was handed a 17-year prison sentence. Jimmy Scales, the getaway driver and known member of the street gang Disciples, faced a more severe consequence with a 25-year sentence. A moment of strength and defiance. The scene in the courtroom that day showed not only the raw power of grief, but also the explosive unpredictability of a young man facing the irreversible consequences of his actions. Michael Thomas's display of strength and defiance, though brief, encapsulated a mix of regret, desperation, and a desperate need for connection in a moment of profound loss. But while Thomas's courtroom disruption might have shown a young man grappling with his reality, what about cases where remorse and emotion come forward in different ways? Like in the story of Brandon Spencer, whose trial would later capture attention for an entirely different kind of emotional outburst.